Hello and welcome. My name is Dr. Jeremy, and today I'll be walking you through how to turn a historical tool into a Google form. The content we'll be using is from Unit 2, Industrial Revolution. The tool will be the image analysis tool, and our video objectives is to help you turn a tool into a Google form that you could use for an assignment or for an assessment, depending on what you need. And so let's first review the tool itself before we go into making it a form. If we look at the tool, there are 4 steps: the observation and sourcing, where we ask students, what do they see, what information is provided in the title, citation, and context, and why that might be important. The next step will be inferences and reasoning, where we ask them, what do you think? What connections could they make to the historical moment? The third step asks the students to really evaluate the image itself. And for this, they'll have to look at the purpose, perspective, and bias, and potentially, if you wish, you could add reliability and limitations. And then they bring it all together to talk about the historical significance of the image itself. How does the image help answer whatever historical question that you have given the students? So we will use content from Unit 2. This has been done in the previous How to Use the Image Analysis video. And our question is going to be, how does this image represent advances in scientific thinking during the long 19th century? And we're going to use the image, An Experiment on a Bird in the Air Pump by Joseph Wright of Derby. So if we're going to start off and create the Google form, go into your Google Drive, go to New, go to Google Forms, and we'll start a new one. You could title it whatever you wish. I'm actually going to title it exactly the title of this form. Here we go. So this form will have our PowerPoint title. And I always like to have just identifying questions of the students. So student name. And I like having that as a short answer. And it'll turn it there for you immediately. I'll make that required. And then the next question, just the period. You could have them write it in, or if you want, you could turn this into a multiple choice question, and they could say they're from period 1, period 2, or period 3. And now I want to get into the sections of the tool itself. So there are 4 steps, so I can make 4 sections. So let's do the first section, and that's going to be the observation and sourcing. But I also want to put in the image itself, right? So you could have the image on a board, or you could have given the students the image in another way. However, what I like is that you could also add the image here. So why don't we do image? And you could do this in several ways. If you already have this saved on your computer, you could bring it up on your computer. However, you can also, if you wish, search for the image itself. So let us actually look at the title of this. So An Experiment on a Bird in the Air Pump. And let's Google search this. Perfect. We have tons of images. I'll just go with the one that I was hovering over. Fantastic. And we'll give the title. And I really like that there was some context in this. So why don't we add some context underneath the add title and description? We'll go back to the form here, the PowerPoint, and we can copy that context. And now we have the context as well. So now students have the ability to do that. And while I was doing that, I realized I actually want the students to just keep everything in one page instead of going from continuous sections. So what you can choose to do, because this is flexible, why don't we say this is going to be the image analysis? And that's going to be our section. And then within each, we can break up the section into its own parts as well. So I'll show you how. So underneath our lovely context here, we're going to do another add title and description, and it'll serve almost like a breaker. So we'll say this is going to be step 1, observation and sourcing. And now we'll add our question. For the observation and sourcing, I think it's really important for students to really break down the questions of, well, what do you see? And I'll actually add in the image, just to make it clear that they should be looking up. And for this, don't mind what length they do. So let's do a paragraph, make that required. And then I also want to ask that question of what information is provided in the title, citation, and context, because I want them to look up, right? I want them to really look at everything that we had given them. And also want them to think, why might this be important? There we go. Hey, so this is going to be step 1. And now we're going to add step 2. And what we could do, since we want to keep everything in one section and have students just go to this above here, we can do step 2. Inferences and reasoning. And then for that, we have a couple of questions that we want them to consider as well. So we could have, what do you think? And once again, I would like to put, what do you think about the image? When you're transferring things to a form, I think it's best to be as clear and explicit as possible. It's easier when you're doing the tool itself for students to go, oh, I'm looking at this image. But with the form, I think it's really good to make it clear what you're expecting. So what do you think about this image? Okay. And then, and I would make this a short answer. The next one here, I'd also make a short answer. And the next one, I would do, what connections can you make to a historical moment? Hey, so the next step has a bit more questions that I'd want the students to consider, right? So let's add the description. And this description is step 3, evaluation. Right. So what we want them to do for this first step is look at the purpose. So there are a couple of questions that we may want to have them ask when they're looking at the purpose, right? So, and we'll say purpose here. And once again, I like being super clear. Purpose of image. And if you want to ask questions just to like help guide the students, I love going into the little dot here. Let me show you again. And then go to description. And if you go into description, you could ask, why was this image created? And you could add any kind of description or additional questions that you want. Right? And there's another part as well, the perspective and bias. You might want to actually switch this and make the perspective one question of its own. So perspective of image. And I love writing the descriptions because it helps really guide the students. So what are we maybe encountering or learning about the artist? What are we learning? I remember I would make it something short and accessible because a Google form, there's a lot going on. You don't want to overload the students. So what are we learning about the author in this image? What is the point of view? And remember, you could ask any question you want, but this is a good way to help guide students through such a multi-step um, tool. And let's say I wanted to do one more and I actually wanted to split bias, right? So the bias, now we want to know, well, now that we know the purpose and the perspective, what what do we know? What potential bias might there be in this image? And once again, you could actually ask any question, but I would keep it simple. While we were going over the image analysis tool, there are tons of questions that you could ask, but I would keep this very simple so that you don't just overwhelm the students with too many things that they can look at. And the next step is putting it all together into the historical significance. So why don't we do another title and description? And this one is going to be step 4. And this is really where they bring everything together, right? So for this one, they are going to do another paragraph here. And let's go back to our question, because this is what we want them to be able to answer. So I copied and paste. Here we go. How does this image, or remember, because it's a form, how does the image above represent advances in scientific thinking during the long 19th century? Make that required as well. So how does this look like at the back end? What I always do, just to make sure the form looks exactly how I want it to look, I go to the preview. So if you go to this eye up here on the form, you could actually do a preview and see how it's going to look for someone taking the form. So this looks good. Let's say Jeremy, I'm in period 1. And perfect. So I have my image here. I have my context. I have my steps. Excellent. And so I could keep going. I could always scroll up and this looks like it's everything I want. You could make it automatic that they get their responses, or you could have them select it themselves. And I'll show you how to do that on the back end. If we go here to the little gear, you can make it that they always get their responses. So I always have that on, but if it's not on for you, click collect emails, response receipt. This is if the respondent or the person who's taking it requested. That's why you saw the button of do you want it? I always say yes, because I like them having a receipt of their work. One, it's something that they could go back to later on for another activity, or is just to make sure they have insurance that they have submitted their work. You could do the edit after submit. I usually don't, but there are tons of things that you could play around with here as well. Right, so let's save that. And this should definitely work. If you wanted to have the image show up multiple places and in between the steps, you could do that as well. I just did it in one go, but there's so many ways that you could use Google Form to really help your students. So I hope this was a good introduction in showing you how you could use these tools, not just in PowerPoints or having the students do it in a Google Doc. You could also have them do it in a Google Form. And what I love about Google Forms is that once you have everything done and you have responses, then you'll also have a spreadsheet with the responses and you can see them on this end too. So I think this is a very useful tool and I hope you try it out. Have a great one.